You are listening to the Ag Tech Talk podcast by AgriBusiness Global. Each episode, we speak with industry experts exploring the intersection of cutting-edge technology and crop protection, getting intel on the fast-changing ag input market. Welcome to the Ag Tech Talk podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Katsaris, Managing Editor for AgriBusiness Global. Today, we'll be speaking to Ofir Ardon, CEO of Agritask, as we discuss the relationship between crop protection and climate change. How does climate change affect how growers use crop protection inputs?
Well, we can first start maybe with how pests are affected, because I don't think anybody has a choice but to react differently. And I can maybe give a few examples. If we take a look at pests and diseases, okay, and you have what we call climate change. It doesn't matter what year you look at, but climate change may be the most important thing about climate change, that it is changing, and the change is not something that you can predict. Very difficult to predict in the long term, let alone in the shorter term. And what happens is that climate is changing, pests and diseases also change. And maybe the most important thing that you can see is what we call invasive pests. Pests that didn't used to be in a specific area, and suddenly they are in this specific area. Okay, maybe one example we can give is fruit fly in California. If you look, 15 years ago, we didn't have this big of a problem. Now we do. Another thing is occurrence. Okay, so the occurrence of these pests and diseases also change. If they were supposed to be at a certain time of the season is changing, or there are shifts of weather between seasons, so also the occurrence of pests and disease change, and this is something that is very difficult to predict. Maybe one more thing, sensitivity of plants. Okay, if you have different distribution of rain, suddenly you might have, long periods of heavy rain and then periods without rain. Plant is stressed. When plant is stressed, it's more sensitive. When it's more sensitive, you'll have an issue of diseases, if not of other things as well. And maybe also diseases that are transmitted by pests that were up until recently were not there. So all in all, predictability is very low now. Okay, new pests, surprising timeframes, new levels of sensitivity. We don't know what's coming, and we don't know when it will hit us. So that's something that everybody will be forced and are already forced to change practices. If they don't, it's, I will have less food on my plate, or it will be more expensive. But the farmers that are growing it are going to be hit even more severely, because this is, how they get paid at the end of the month or at the end of the year. So if you put that in context, so everything needs to change. Okay. Everything, by that I mean, whatever you used to monitor or never monitor, now you need to monitor more closely, because it's not like you can predict what's going to happen and keep spraying at the same time of the season like nothing changed. So I'm assuming that to some extent monitoring, or the way that people monitor pests and diseases within their fields, need to change drastically, and it is changing drastically. In some places more than others. Treatment needs to change because, if we look at the most simplistic way of treating, let's spray on this and that date. Now it needs to change, because we might have different dates now. Okay, we might have different sprays because we have new pests, and we might need to use rotation. Okay, different rotation so it's touching upon everything. I don't see anything that cannot change. Let's put it this way. But then again, this leads to, I don't want to say new methods, because there are some methods that used to exist, like always existed. But I think that what climate change is doing is forcing this change, or forcing all the parties involved in pest and disease management to implement better practices faster. Okay? And by better practices, I mean practices that are related to either integrated pest management, if you're familiar with this term, but also what we're more specializing in is how do you manage pest and disease on a regional scale, not at the farm level, but rather at a regional scale. And that goes for either we're managing it at the level of a country, a whole country is managing pest and disease like it was a whole gigantic field, or a specific supply chain that is managing some type of a regional extension. And that goes to the fact that pests and diseases don't have boundaries. They don't care if farmer A is farmer A and it doesn't owe farm B. They don't care about it. So kind of like, what's the point of managing pests on a single field and not in a regional scale? So our focus, or our technology focus, has and still is on what we call portfolio level management of either farms, practices, and everything that is related to that.
How will this data provided by Agritask help protect crops and bolster growers' pest control mitigation with fewer chemicals and better timing thanks to weather data?
There are three ways that it can happen, okay? And it's not about the data that is provided by Agritask, but let's call it the data that is being enabled and accessible by Agritask. Okay, it's difficult to generate data, something from nothing. Somebody have to provide this data, or some type of a sensor needs to give this data, okay? If I put it on a high level, in general terms, technologies that can put some type of solutions that can help or assist, I can think of three types, okay? All of them, to some extent, I would be able to find some type of a use case working on our platform currently. But first, everything that is related to predictability, okay? We don't know how climate is going to change, but we do know certain parameters that if they happen, we might have an outburst, for example. Okay, so that's all the point of developing models that are tracking weather. Could be at a massive scale, but put many farms on a single system, put a weather station or a virtual weather station on each and every one of them, track it. And then you could put some alerts that if something happens, a certain amount of prolonged rain or something else is happening, there's going to be an outburst. Okay. And then on a timely basis, we could provide alerts that in a massive scale will enable many parties within a supply chain to know that something is coming and they need to do something preventative. Okay. This is one type of what I can call concept that can be resolved by technology or assisted by technology. So that's the whole world of models. This is pretty much straightforward. Developing new models, let's call it this way. Second one, best way to put it would be like, there is a regional extension project. These are a set of activities done by a certain party or parties that do something on the field, either scout, promote some type of a treatment, or actually spray and then remonitor. This thing is something that is done usually manually. But if you don't have a technology to back it up and to support it, it will not be synchronized. If it's not synchronized, it's like you're not doing it. Okay. So what technology enables here is to synchronize these activities. And I'll give some examples in a few minutes. Maybe one more concept that I can think of. It's kind of like not straightforward. It's more for the longer term. But one of the ways that you can cope with, resistance to pests and disease is to, adjust the varieties, change varieties. Simply replace an entire variety in the field, use something else which could be more resistant or more adjusted to that specific weather change. And then you should be okay, or you should be less sensitive to pests and diseases, for example. Now, usually you'll see food and beverage companies that are investing in research and development. If they're like, I can see some examples from the coffee industry. They're actually developing new varieties. But when you develop a new variety and you're used to the old ways of doing it, you will have some type of a trial farm somewhere, and you'll test all kinds of varieties because, you have a small R&D team and you need to put it somewhere and to start testing it. The only problem is that, it's in one location, two locations, and it probably will not fit all use cases. So the other way to do it, if you have a strong technology to back it up and to have an entire, a visibility on your farms worldwide, so you can multiply this type of trials or attempts or research like 10-fold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold. Why? Because you can start testing trees in all kinds of locations, know where they are because you stored it on our system, for example, and track it or trace it based on the regular parameters that you're already tracking. And then, you pace up your learning cycle much faster. So yeah, this is not something that can improve everything in a day, but nevertheless, an R&D attempt that you have to develop a new variety could suddenly decrease significantly when you're trying to deploy it globally. So this is another way that technology can back up all types of situations. I think that the one that is most straightforward, or I don't want to say straightforward, difficult to do without a technology is what we call the treatment synchronization. Okay, that's the regional extension projects. And that goes back to your question, what data do we provide? Think about the fact that you have many farms. Okay, usually these farms or farmers don't talk to one another. In most cases, they don't know one another. Maybe they do if they're in the same village, but it's not like that they're sharing information. Okay, and each one of them is could work differently. One of them likes to travel in his field and look at the plants on a daily basis. One of them might say, no, I don't need to do it. I'm going maybe 3 times a year to my field. It doesn't really happen, but you'll see differences in these practices. Nobody is looking at all the information that they have in some type of a synchronized way. And what happens is that each one of them will act alone. Now, if you have a way to synchronize everything, and I'm talking now about the monitoring process, you can make sure that you have a team that is actually scouting many fields. If they scout many fields, or they make sure that all fields are being scouted, and they gather all this information on a single system, and by information, I mean, okay, I saw a pest, I need to report it. It's in this and that location, this and that type of pest, in this and that quantity, okay? Once you see it on the system, you will probably identify outbursts before they are outbursts, okay? I'll note that there is an outburst in one field, and I can start spraying all the fields around it. So I'll prevent from the other fields that are in the second region from being harmed at all. So this is something that you can kill while it's still young, okay? But there's literally no way to do it without a technology, because you need to report all this information, and you need somebody, one party that makes a decision to be able to see all this information in a system that it will be easy to see. This is kind of goes back to the roots of what we do. We enable this scouting activity in a massive scale. Even in areas where there's no connectivity whatsoever, everybody can report in the same way, meaning in what we call in a standardized way, so that we know that we scout for everything that we're afraid of that might happen. Okay. We have some nice examples even here in Israel that there's several regional extension projects that you get scouts, sometimes sent by the government or by some type of a governmental organization. They are scouting everything, okay, using a single platform. And that way they know what's happening in all the fields. It doesn't matter who it belongs to in a certain region. And then if something bad happens or they see something that is about to happen, they can decide to spray and not be depending on the farmers to spray it on their own, because one of them might and the other one might not for some reason. Okay. Once they can make sure that everything was sprayed, well, you either eliminate the risk on time or significantly reduce the cost that it will later take to fight this pest. Okay. This is what we do with our system. Later, you can also make sure that on a single system, you can store or promote all the practices that you want to, like what do we want to spray with? How do we want to rotate the chemical ingredient? Okay. So that we don't create resistance among certain pests. And all these things, if you have a good system in place, you cannot just collect the information, but also store what you decided to execute and how you decided to execute it. And you can also then re-monitor and see, okay, did it work? Did it not work? Mm-hmm. And you pace up your learning cycle of how to fight a certain pest. And this is the way that you can start treating with technology and with the right processes on the field, something which no farmer on his own can do. And we highly believe, and this is the way that you should fight these risks. And we're also there to promote it, whether we're doing it with food and beverage companies in some regional extensions, in some attempts that they have in some regions, or with governments.
And you mentioned too, there's this technology. So what does that look like? What is this technology? How do people report it? Is it they just write something down in their notes and then they send it off to you guys? Is there a whole computer system behind it? How does that look?
Good question. So in most places in the world, the way that this is working is, yes, like you said, it's a pen and paper. But when it's a pen and paper, it's not really data. The way that we do it is, first of all, we put a piece of technology in each and every hand in the supply chain, okay? Ranging from sometimes even the farmers themselves. We have the part of our mobile app, which can store protocols for reporting, okay? But in a standardized way. Screens that you can report on the field, when you're on the field, all the information that is relevant. If you're scouting for pests, you will have a whole protocol of what you need to report, what types of pests. And if you do it with a mobile phone, it stores the location that you were in when you sampled. So suddenly, instead of having a piece of paper, you have a piece of data with time, location stamp, and exactly what you've seen over there in a numerical type of characteristics that you can actually use. Now, multiply it for all the scouts that are doing it in all days throughout the year, and you suddenly have a whole map, and this is the web part of the platform, that you can start looking at the trends, okay? Whether it's where are the risks, what type of pests, where are they, over time, how do they evolve? And then again, this is just one piece of it. This is the scouting part. And now I'm talking just about pest and disease because we report a lot of things on our mobile app, not just that, but this is one example. Second part is the web screens that we have that promote what we call integrated decision making. Okay, so set of screens that enable the agronomist or whomever is a decision maker to see the right data in the right time in context, whether it's alerts, whether it's all the agronomic analytics part that it can view in order to make a decision. A decision means, okay, when to spray, what to spray with, and I don't know, let's say how much dosage, for example. And with a click of a button, you can what we call download or like provide some type of a task. Okay, plan a task on the system. In the same way, the same people that are on the field will get it back to their mobile apps, what they need to do in the morning. Okay, where do they need to go? What material they have to use? How much they need to use? When they do it, they can report it. And again, the person in the back knows, was it executed? If it wasn't executed, it could either predict another risk that is going to take place or take another action, another task, and to bring it back to the level of the field. So on our web part, it's the ability of decision maker to analyze this information and to get it in the right time, to be able to make a decision faster, a more precise type of decision, and to enable him to put the task in the system in a way that it can be executable and store this execution or monitor this execution. So it's kind of like closing the loop of monitoring, deciding, executing the decision, and remonitoring and learning back in order to not miss out on anything.
Right. Especially if they get different results than the last person too, they can then implement whatever they experienced to give more information back to it.
Exactly. They can also make, a task could be, all right, something is weird over there. Please go again and scout for another type of pest, for example. Okay. Or I don't know, it could be like things that are even much more simple than that. Let's make sure that somebody even planted. Maybe nobody planted on that field. It's a whole set of agronomic parameters that we need to track. But I'm just giving you one piece of the pie here, which is pest and disease. But, pest and disease is one thing. Then you have soil management, soil and fertility management, planting management, harvest management, and some other things, irrigation management. These are all agronomic parameters. We're viewing a piece of it, a very important piece, but nevertheless a piece of it. So then nevertheless, a very good example for what is a regional extension project. And then again, the people who can execute such a thing have to be either somebody that is tied to the government and acting according to some type of a regulatory environment that is enforcing the government or the farmers to do something. Or it could be a supply chain that has sufficient value that it wants to add to its farmers, or some type of a unique contractual relations with the farmers that they can actually enforce what to do, what practices to use. And in some cases, it's also universities that are managing it. But always have to be somebody with an integrity view of many farms in a given region.
How much reduction in crop protection products do you forecast for growers using this software?
And I'd have to say it depends. I could argue, no, we'll use the same amount of materials, but we'll use them differently, so it will be more productive. Okay, I'll have less harm or damage to the crops in a given region. I could even argue, no, we need to use more. Okay, but not more as if what I have to do if I didn't use a system. All right, so there is always an alternative cost. But if I put climate change out of the equation for a second, so yes, the outcome is reduction. And reduction could be the level of 20%, and it could also be at the level of sometimes 60%. Okay? It depends what were the practices that were used beforehand. That goes to a little bit maybe about integrated pest management. It's whether you're not managing pest and disease or you're actually scouting, monitoring constantly, and spraying more precisely and on time in order to decrease the cost of treating this issue. Okay? And it could vary. There's no right and wrong here. If I take a portfolio of small farm holders in let's take it in Kenya, for example, in a couple of villages in Kenya that I can choose, maybe they didn't use anything. And now we're going to use, but up until now, they could be such a damage because they didn't use anything that could make, the entire couple of villages completely poor. So it's not necessarily just reducing, but it's optimizing the use of material.
Weather influences insect development and population. How do you see Agritask being used to help farmers predict and treat for pests?
Actually, one of our very recent releases of a feature, our recent product, is something that doesn't require boots on the ground. We've developed it specifically to identify potential shortages in crops, in certain supply chains, not in all crops. Maybe one example could be coffee, another one could be cherries, or another one could be any type of stone fruit, or even barley. Okay, this feature is working based on weather monitoring. We know that every crop out there is responding within its DNA. It's responding to a certain amount of weather parameters in order to take the order of, when to move from one phenological stage to another. But also different weather parameters can affect differently how much it is damaged. Okay. So currently we're focusing on what we call damages to quality and quantity based on weather parameters. Okay. But the next evolution of it, we're looking into. And constantly, because some of the damages can happen not directly, but because a certain weather event can lead to pests that it will be very, very difficult to cope with. You will not be able to respond on time. So it leads to actually shortages. Yes, but it's part of what we're aiming at is also to provide these alerts that somebody can do something about it. So the alerts that we're developing are also related to pest and disease, potential outbursts. We're not going to treat it directly as it's affecting the yield, but we will provide these alerts to the relevant parties if they want to make use of it and prepare for what's coming. So some of the tools that we're developing are more in the area of what I just mentioned, which is predictability. But this is very specific because it will be specific to a certain region, to a certain crop, and sometimes even to a certain variety and to a certain pest. It's not like one model, one thing fits all. But in every supply chain that we're deploying, either the POC now, that identifies the damages, little by little, we'll start adding these types of alerts as well to provide added value to the farmers or to the rest of the supply chain. But the other thing, of course, is our way of supporting regional extension projects. This is a big chunk of our product offering, the system that you can deploy almost in any type of supply chain out there that can help you significantly, much better manage these regional extensions on a portfolio of farms. It's just that it's not the farmers that use it directly. Mm-hmm. It's the people that are on behalf of the supply chain or behalf of the aggregator that is managing this type of project.
And are you having any issues with growers adopting this technology? If so, what are some of the barriers? And does internet connection have anything to do with it?
We are used to be working offline. Okay. Agriculture in general is working offline. Our app is working offline. It's syncing immediately when you have connectivity. But it was made what we call ourselves like offline first. That's part of a piece that we sold since the day that Agritask was founded. Regarding the other questions, it's the $1 million question across the entire industry. It's the adoption of farmers. We're not farmer first. Okay, most of the users of Agritask are not farmers. Mm-hmm. And there are the different people on behalf of the supply chains that are in the field. Okay, scouts, auditors, agronomists and consultants on behalf of a supply chain that are visiting the farms, sometimes also the farms, okay, the farmers. But you cannot expect a farmer to simply just take a technology and do what the technology tells him to do, all right? I can give maybe the most basic example. Here in Israel, okay, government may decide to spray because, I don't know, the Mediterranean fruit fly, for example. It doesn't mean that the farmer, even if he trusts that somebody sprayed, it doesn't mean that he will not spray. He will spray as well. And it seems like it's a waste to some extent. But you cannot expect him to not spray. Why? It's the same like you live in some type of a village. You had some break-ins lately. And I'm telling you, as the head of the village, I'm going to bring you a best security company in the world. It's going to do tours around the houses. And now you're safe. Does it mean that you will not lock the door?
Right. No, I'm still going to lock it.
Okay. So, yeah. And that's part of the issue. So, yeah, you can tell the farmer what to do. You can try and assist him. You can help him. Eventually, he has years and generations of experience. And this is something that is very difficult to change. Yes, he can use the technology. It doesn't mean that he will change his practices. He might take from the technology what he needs, but changing the practices takes something completely different. Okay? It takes a huge amount of training and persuasion. And sometimes even, you need to cover them by insurance or whatever promise you want to give them. Because the second that they change a practice, they have a risk of not having what they had today, up until today. Mm-hmm. Okay? So if I was a farmer and you would want to ensure that I'm changing my practices, I would tell you, fine, pay me in advance everything that I was supposed to be making. And then I'll be able to work as much as you want. But ensure to me that even if I don't produce anything, I'm still going to keep this money. So that way you would probably ensure 100% that I'm going to do whatever you want me to do. I'd implement any technology that you want, and I'd implement any practice you want me to implement. These, unfortunately, are not the amounts of capital that are being deployed to change activities at the level of a farm. So that's why you're starting by activities to several farmers that you can maybe manage all together. Little by little, you can start maybe assisting farmers with, some information, maybe some alerts, and we've done that time and again. That you can ask them to start playing ball, like, let's provide more information, like, let's report something. Doesn't mean that they will change their practices, but they might report. So then, okay, so now you can get more information and maybe act upon this information. Or this information was much easier or much cheaper to acquire. But that doesn't ensure that they will change their practices. To change your practice, you actually need to prove over season after season that something will be better if he acts in a different way. And that takes time. That is not something that you can measure the day that the technology is being implemented. It can take a very long time. I would even argue that longer than any other industry that I've seen, because it moves in the pace that crops move, which is very...
Yeah. I did this other interview yesterday, and the theme of that was, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I feel like that might be like the motto that most farmers have.
Is it really not broken? That's
right. Yeah. Like, you don't know. It could always get better.
There is one way, by the way, and maybe to some extent, this is part of the reason why we were choosing to go after supply chains, like the buyers. Okay. Two ways that I see that you can change your practice. One, enforce it with a fine. Okay. So change the regulations. This is one way that it can happen. And I think politically, this is very difficult to do. I don't see many politicians are willing to change or to enforce something on farmers, because look at what's happening in some places when farmers decide to protest. So they have a very strong political power, no matter how you look at it. But this is one way that it could change. And you see these things happen. Okay, EUDR. So the supply chains will have to enforce that nothing is being deforested. So you can do it via regulation. This is one way to do it. And I'd argue that regulation works only if you have fines. If you don't have fines, so it's like there's no real regulation. The second way is, incentives on the good side, right? If you're a strong supply chain, if you're a buyer and you're willing to pay premium for something, that could work, all right? And that goes for the world of certifications, okay? I could argue that farmers who are certified get premium for their yield more than farmers who are not certified with a certain certification that is important for that specific buyer. Okay, so this is the other way. But you got to have the entire supply chain geared towards this type of objective in order for that to happen. The other way to do it would be, okay, I'm going to add value to you. If I'm a Starbucks, a Nestle, a Volcafe, you name any coffee player that you want, and I'm willing to help small farm holders, for example, in Rwanda, in Ethiopia, or in Guatemala. Okay. I can dedicate some agronomists with a good system to go scout, interact with the farmers and help them over something that is related to fertilization or something that is related to pest and disease management. All right. If I gain the trust of the farmers, so I'll be able to do certain activities that I'll be able to execute on behalf of the farmers, for the farmers. But it doesn't matter if the farmer did it on his own or I managed to implement it on his behalf. It's the same thing. The result is the same, but it calls for a bit of a different perspective on the farmer. Stop looking at them as singles. Look at it as a supply chain and try to look at it as something unified. And this is why we believe it will come from the aggregators, not from the farmers themselves. They, unfortunately, are small and medium-sized businesses, mostly small. And it's not a B2B, it's more like a B2C. It's a very different challenge. I mean, yes, sometimes they have cooperatives, but it's not like the cooperative can do something on behalf of all the farmers. They cannot enforce anything. And they can represent them, but that's about it. So it will be difficult to change practices farmer by farmer by farmer directly. Mm-hmm. This is not something that I don't want to say we don't believe in it. We do believe in changing it, but not directly via the farmers.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you for listening to the Ag Tech Talk podcast by AgriBusiness Global. To find more podcasts, videos, event and webinar information, and the latest ag news, visit agribusinessglobal.com.